Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, the new M.B.A, flexible, cheaper, and lifelong. An article by Patrick Thomas in the Wall Street Journal. Mark and Anika will discuss what are the pros and cons of using a Roth IRA to pay for college. Our question from a listener is, I heard that students can get dual citizenship if they attend college in Canada. Can that be true? Our interview is with Chika Nwosu on reflections on my freshman and sophomore year at the University of Miami. And there will be no college spotlight this segment because we will have a special segment on early decision, the surprising numbers for the class of 2021.
Good morning, friends. First of all, the interview with Chika, I looked back, Dave, at how many interviews we've actually had with college students. Yeah. And in 150 episodes, we've only had 2.
Wow.
2. And that includes one with your daughter, Lauren.
Wow.
So I decided to do a deeper dive with Chika. So that's going to be a 4-parter. We're going to go into a lot of information about the University of Miami. So you kind of serves almost as a Miami spotlight as well as a college student interview. I think you're going to really enjoy it. For those of you who are new to our podcast, we had Chika on episode 38 when she was just at the start of her college process, on episode 81 when she'd made a decision. And that was a good year and a half ago. So she is back. Now, a few weeks ago, I mentioned on the podcast that I have a Christmas gift for all of our listeners. And my gift is 2 free hours of Spanish tutoring with my daughter, who's a professional Spanish tutor. And I laid out a process that email us and blah, blah, blah. Well, I want to make it a lot more simple with some details that'll make it clearer than the cumbersome way that I shared it before. So first of all, instead of contacting us if you're interested, just go to Karis's website, which is SpanishHelpToday.com. All you have to do is go to her website, SpanishHelpToday.com, click the free consultation, and then you're going to see a few questions. It's going to say, are you a beginner, intermediate, or proficient? And then it's going to also ask you, do you know any other languages? So in that place where it says, do you know any other languages, just write in, I'm a Your College Bound Kid listener, and I'd like to talk to you about my 2 free hours that I'm getting complimentary from Mark Stucker, and Karis will take it from there. Now, I can't do this for hundreds of people, but the first 20 people from December 17th until 20 come in, the first 20 people will get 2 free hours. You'll get to meet my daughter. My way of thanking you for being a loyal Your College Bound Kid listener. So Merry Christmas in advance.
And let me just give all props to your daughter's Spanish teaching skills. My daughter has just thoroughly enjoyed their sessions. She considers it taking an additional language course while she's been here at this time at home, and I think they've really had a bond and friendship. So I'm giving full props to your daughter's Spanish. It's a course well worth taking.
Well, you're next, Dave. This is not just for students. So this is for a parent that wants to learn a language, or a student. It's also for someone who doesn't know the alphabet, like Dave, or someone who's very proficient. It's for all levels.
Well, you better tell her she needs to take a certificate course in special education if she wants to try it, because my Spanish sucks. Okay, she might need to go back for additional training for those special students.
Well, she completed a special certification process for working with medical professionals, because you have to translate all the medical terms into Spanish. So she's done that. So if you don't know the alphabet, that's okay. It might help you get a job.
That's right. I haven't gone much beyond Master Vesa, por favor, for the last 20 years. So
you're next, my friend.
All right.
Now, you might have heard Dave say, calling an audible in the last part. So for months, I've been hearing from admission officers about how stressed out they are about early decision applications. And they're so convinced they're going to be down because people can't visit campus and they can't travel. And now the numbers are coming in. I'm doing these counselor calls, and school after school after school is telling me they're breaking their record with the number of early decision applicants. So we're going to talk about this. What's going on? How could it go from expecting to get so few to school after school seeing such eye-popping early decision numbers? So you got to stay to the end for that. That's going to be our final segment. Throw an Audible special in there, and we'll pick up University of South Florida next week for our college spotlight. All right. Admission tip. So I'm not going to do a deep dive on this. I want to touch on it. If you are deferred, because decisions are coming out right now and students are getting deferred, admitted, and denied. If you are deferred, follow to a T what a school says they want you to do. Almost can't think of any school that has early admission process that doesn't have some guidelines for deferred applicants, either on their website or in the email they send out. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to underdo it. Now, I always say most schools that say they don't look at interest do it in some way. Here's an example. Almost every school that defers applicants, they want to know if you want to continue to be considered. So you need to be proactive. They immediately want to know if these people that are deferred, which ones are taking themselves out of consideration and staying in. But follow to a T what they tell you to do. Don't overdo it. Don't underdo it. And that's the best advice.
And Mark, if my memory serves correctly, you did a podcast early on
Ooh, good memory,
specifically
Dave.
What to do sometime in the first 30.
Well, so what it was, I interviewed Rick Clark, Georgia Tech's admission director, and basically this was on episodes 49, 50, and 51. And the topics were, what do you do if you're accepted? There's a good way to handle acceptance, and there's a bad way to handle acceptance. If you're denied? There's a good way and a bad way. And what do you do if you're deferred or waitlisted?
That's correct.
So that'd be a good podcast for you to go listen to. If you missed that, you can just go to yourcollegeblindkid.com and just either put Rick Clark in the search bar. That'd probably be the easiest way. And check it out. It's good content.
That's right.
But the bottom line for now is follow the guidelines really carefully, because a lot of times schools will have real explicit things they'll share with you, such as, do they welcome an additional recommendation? Yes or no? What is their procedure for you to tell them that your interest is still there? Do they recommend an additional contact or communication from you? Schools have all kinds of different processes and procedure. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So that's what I want to say for now. That we'll keep it short and sweet.
Awesome.
All right. For our admissions vernacular, Dave, admission pre-reads. Admission pre-reads. What is admission pre-reads?
Okay, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to use my Watson, my Sherlock Holmes process of deduction. Admissions. It has to do with admissions. And pre-read. Clearly, you are doing an early read of an application before you actually do the in-depth, thorough read.
So far, every single thing you've said is right now. I would still flunk you if that was all you said.
Oh, man. All right, heart marks.
I'm going to take it from there. So what happens when it comes to recruiting athletes at Division III and Ivy League is they can't give scholarships out. And they have these very complicated applications, oftentimes with lots of essay questions. So coaches feel like they're at a decisive disadvantage. We already can't give athletic scholarships. Now we're asking people to do these really complicated, applications with 3 or 4, sometimes 5 additional questions. The deck's stacked against us. So what they offer is admission pre-read. And basically it involves you submitting your transcript for a transcript review, your test scores. And by the way, even if they're test optional, they strongly encourage you to submit scores. And in some cases, there's some additional things such as a short answer or 2. And then what happens is that the athletic office works in conjunction with the admission office to do an initial read. And then you'll hear back from a coach and they'll tell you pretty much a couple of ways I see them commonly work. They'll either put you in categories like sure thing, likely, or not going to happen. Or sometimes they'll do like a numerical, like on a 1 to 5 scale, they'll tell you like 5 is a definite and 4 is a highly probable. You're like a 4.5. And sometimes they'll say with early decision, this is where you are. And with regular, this is where you are. But most of the time, if they tell you that you're going to be in, you're going to be in. They can't guarantee it yet because they haven't done a full application review. But it's a great way for them to get a commitment from an athlete so they have the talent and to make the athlete feel like it's worthwhile to go through your process. I probably should do a question from a listener on this and do a deeper dive because that's a lot to try to jam into a missions vernacular, but hopefully people get the gist of it.
Yes, and one question. What time frame does this pre-read usually occur, Mark? Is this
September?
Fall?
No, September and October, early October.
Okay.
That's a great question.
So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep, September and early October. It can be earlier than that, too. It can be earlier than that because once they have your fall transcript, your transcript through junior year, and if you've got your test scores done, then it can occur in late summer.
And you've talked about this before, that for many sports such as football, they really need to have a read by early January of who's going to fill out their roster. So they really have an early decision need to get a sense of who's going to be recruitable.
Well, it's not just football. It's pretty much all sports. And in some cases, you could make a case it's more true for other sports. So, for example, one of the students I worked with this year, he's a tennis player. So, he got the pre-reads on all the different schools. He was interested in a sport like tennis has very few players.
Yes.
So it's almost more important for a sport like that versus football, where, there's a lot of other players on the team, although football is a revenue producing sport for schools. So it does make it a priority. But yeah, this is the way the process is done. And this is what happens. And it's a lot of kids at certain schools. We talked about this before. Places like Amherst, 30% of their incoming class are athletes. That doesn't mean every one of them went through the athletic pre-read process, but most of them do.
That's an incredible statistic, by the way. A lot more athletes than physicists. So there you go.
Well, it's you got to look at it this way. These are very small schools. If they're admitting a class of under 300, and think how many sports they have, male and female, it is just a lot of spots. So that's why one of the reasons why they're just so hard to get in. And by the way, Dartmouth's almost 30% too, because it's a smaller school.
Wow. Let me give, for comparison, do you know the percentage from like Stanford?
Yeah, 15.
Wow.
Stanford, Stanford is almost 15%. Now they've recently phased out some sports, but Stanford was 8 to 850 athletes in their student body. So yeah, so quite a bit. The bigger the school, the less it is. Right. So, a place like Princeton is going to be 15 to 20%.
Makes sense.
Which, by the way, is the easiest way to get into these schools is to have an athletic cook. It's still hard, but it's still the easiest way. Unless you're not an athlete.
That's right. That's right. I had a whole new respect for fencing. Only thing is, in terms of personal protection, it's sort of hard to carry around a foil in the inner city. So I never really. I'm an urban type of guy.
You can do it in the Virgin Islands.
You can do it in the Virgin Islands. So.
All right, Dave, take our article away before we're back to 2-hour episode again. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
The new M.B.A, flexible, cheaper, and longer. Harvard and Columbia business schools are starting to add certificates and, quote, lifelong learning to other programs, a shift that could transform business education in the years ahead. There's a great article by Patrick Thomas of the Wall Street Journal. So, Mark, I'm going to do a quick synopsis, and then we're going to do a deep dive together because there's a lot of interesting points in this article.
There really are. And, Dave, you should also mention... I think it's a good time for people that haven't heard, talk a little bit about your executive MBA you did too.
Yeah, and my wife's part-time MBA and how the difference is between those two. But anyways, this was an interesting article. It talked about the idea of lifelong learning. And it started off with a quote by Deborah Spara, who's the new dean of Harvard Business School Online. And it says, quote, "It makes no sense that people should get all of their education in their 20s. And that they said that prior to the pandemic, it was really hard to get people to commit to full-time MBA programs because the job market was so hard. But of course, once the pandemic hit, as in times of many recessions, applications exploded. But they expect that to be temporary. And they actually expect that there's going to be a growing demand for part-time, executive, blended, online, and stackable MBAs. So this is very interesting. All these terms mean something a little bit different. And the one new term to me, Mark, was a stackable MBA. What the heck is that? Stackable. And that's where you can actually get an MBA at different schools and different times. So let me just say this one last thing, and we're going to throw it open to a discussion. Bottom line was Columbia and Harvard Business Schools have added certificate programs. These are now online programs. They don't give degrees, but they give certificates, and it allows there to be a lifelong learning component to their MBA programs. It allows many times students who've already achieved their MBA to come back and take additional courses without returning to campus. And it also allows people who are actually engaged in other types of employment and who may not have the opportunity to physically leave and go to the campus to actually take online education, like a Spotify, where they take individual streaming online courses specific to their needs and get a certificate instead of a full degree. So let me stop there, Mark, and see where you want to take this and see which aspects of this article you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I was impressed with the article and with the concept. And I think it's an example of something you and I have talked about for a while, Dave, which is education is going to have to be a lot more innovative and a lot more cost effective and a lot more creative. And it's going to have to find ways of utilizing online and find ways of getting people education in shorter spurts. And all of those things were involved in this. I mean, the article talks about a typical certificate program can cost $2,000. So you're talking about a cheaper and easier way of giving some people a little bit of education. I love the idea of being a lifelong learner. We all know how important that is. There's this false sense out there that you go to college and now you're educated. Well, you know what? I'd much rather have someone who doesn't go to college and reads for the rest of their life, and I'll put their knowledge up over someone who goes to college for 4 years and doesn't, and their mind becomes like a prune and they don't ever cultivate it again. You have to continually be educating. And so some of the creative ideas they discussed in here, like not only ongoing education, but possibly even ongoing education where you go and take different courses at different schools as a part of that ongoing education. And you're right, Dave, they used the Spotify example in here. Another example they used, they called it a Netflix style subscription service, and I think of what that Swiss Army knife, you know what I mean? That has all these different things to it. I think this is education like with the Swift Army life for the 21st century.
That's right.
And I like the idea of not only ongoing, but what's really nice about so many of these courses is that they have a focus on practical education. So you're in the real world, hopefully you're using these skills. And then you go back. And it talked about that in this article. It said, we've been hearing from employers that they want to see our graduates have more data science skills and more technology skills. So we're revamping up our data science component and our technology because that's what employers demand. And so I love the ability to look at what employers are demanding, come up with these really short, either certificate programs or courses or ongoing components to an education, and meeting the need of the marketplace in a cost-effective way. Now, one thing the article did talk about, which is there's a balance that these schools, particularly these elite schools, are trying to strike because they're trying to make the education more accessible and more affordable, but they also know that whoever they can further their brand on, that's part of, walking around and representing who their school is. And it did talk about at the very end of the article, there is some concern that if there's not enough screening on the front end, do they end up deteriorating their brand? I'll read a quote. So Rich Lyons, the former dean of the University of California, Berkeley Haas School of Business, expects certificates and specialized programs to expand at business schools. But then says, but elite colleges should be careful, he says. If they admit too many unqualified students, it could deteriorate their reputations. It's brand risk. For top institutions, what they are credentialing is your character, he says. And if there's no filter about who gets in, watch out, because they will get associated with your name. So that's sort of the tension that they wrestle with. Anyway, I've said a lot, Dave. What do you want to say?
Well, yes, and I just wanted to add that they really made the point of saying that the pandemic has really taught the skeptics that online education is not just feasible, but is actually in many cases desirable because it's so flexible to meet people's needs. And that right now, 39% of business schools are offering some level of graduate level certificates. So, once again, we see the effects of coronavirus just accelerating existing trends on steroids and making a reality things that might have taken 10 years. Now we're seeing it being done in 2. So that was very interesting.
No, that was a really good point.
Well, they gave a lot of props to Harvard and Columbia for the online part, but the truth is that one school that has been on the leading edge of flexible education for MBAs has been Northwestern. And I remember, I'm not going to say exactly how many years ago, but it was over 2 decades.
Bust it. I'll bust on you, man.
Well,
everybody knows you're 57 already, man. So what are you hiding?
After 50, you start counting backwards. So I'm 43. But when my wife graduated from college from Northwestern, she went into banking and in finance. And in the next couple of years, she was able to take her MBA at Northwestern part-time, which at that time was quite revolutionary, the idea of being able to do a part-time education. And then after a couple of years in finance and banking, then she went back to medical school and then later became an anesthesiologist. I took a little different route in that I had already graduated from residency and I was actually a medical director at the time. And then I decided I wanted additional education related to the job and the company I was working in. And so at that time, Northwestern and then later the University of Chicago started something called the Executive MBA. And it was specifically tailored to working executives who did not have the ability to actually leave their jobs for 2 years full time. So it tried to incorporate the MBA into their job. And the way it worked is that you could either do every other weekend or every week for a day and a half. And that would be usually on a Friday and a Saturday, or a Saturday and a Sunday. And for 2 years, you would meet with other mid-level MBAs, and they crafted a course really designed not just for the flexibility of your schedule, but for your life experience. And it was a little bit more of a life experience, an experiential MBA that was designed for people who had some years under their belt. I loved it. It was great. And I think, now with the online MBA that they're talking about and the stackable MBAs are really just an outgrowth of the part-time and executive MBA programs that have been going on for the last couple of decades. So having been through them myself, they're very, very helpful. And then every year they have conferences and additional courses you can take through the school to increase your skill sets or to brush up or learn about new things that may be relevant to your field. So that's just my story.
So Dave, give me an example of what something you learned that you were able to apply to your profession.
Well, it was very interesting. What they did was they broke us out into groups based on our experience. So I, of course, was a physician who had some medical management, but they'd always make sure that they had groups of 5 or 6 people, and they wanted to make your experience as disparate as possible. So I would be with someone who was an accountant, another person who was maybe in finance, another person who was in the tech. And they would assign us specific projects. And the idea is with each project, you would elect a group leader. And the group leader would try and elicit different perspectives from each member of the group, depending on the experience that they brought to the project. So one interesting example was we once had an accounting assignment, and we had an accountant. And the accountant says, well, let me do this portion of the homework, and you guys focus on what this part was perfectly legal in the group setting. So I came home with this big assignment, and my wife was there, and she was like, oh, I love accounting. This is great. Let me help you, honey. I will basically help you learn how to do this accounting. I said, well, don't worry about it, dear. I don't have to worry about the accounting assignment part because one of my group members are taking care of it. She says, well, who's doing that? I said, it's the accountant. And she said, well, if you have the accountant do the accounting, how are you ever going to learn about accounting? And I said, well, I'll learn how to hire an accountant. And my wife was convinced that was cheating and I was violating the honor code. And I said, no, that's part of the executive M.B.A, how to work within a group setting and utilize other people's talents.
Love it. Great story. Great story. So here's an interesting quote from the article just to show the growth of both online and certificate programs and the market that's out there. So it says Harvard Business School Online, which offers certificates instead of degrees, it started 6 years ago. And 6 years ago, it had 500 students. It says now it has more than 30,000. So it's gone from 500 to 30,000 in 6 years. The program has 13 courses and they're developing 8 more. And then kind of to reinforce what you were saying, Dave, the standard Harvard MBA is aimed at people in their 20s, but the Harvard Business School Online targets people in their 30s and their 40s who are reluctant to leave their jobs and come to campus. So that's the flexibility of you don't need to come to us, we'll come to you.
Yes. And they do make a point of saying that for these schools, this has been a money maker. It increases loyalty, and of course, it's a great way to increase the revenue stream. So, Mark, a little back of the envelope calculation. You have 30,000 students, and let's say you're charging $10,000 per student per year. I'm just making that figure up, but it sounds reasonable. I'm just sort of adding those zeros together, my friend. And I came up with $30 million.
Hey, didn't need your accountant friend for that one.
That's right. Folks, that's what you get for getting an executive MBA. You can add the zeros. But I was like, nice. And remember, that's just an add-on. That's not their main program.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, this time I'm not forgetting, Anika. It is our Twitter countdown, like I did last week.
But you got it in there, though.
I did, thanks to you. So in number 10, we started out. We had, recap actually. Number 10 was Ariana Grande. Number 9, Ellen DeGeneres. Number 8, Lady Gaga. And by the way, these are the most people with the most Twitter followers. For those of you who haven't heard our past few episodes, we're doing a throwback. Anika and I used to do these top 10 countdowns like year 1, I think. Was it year 1 or year 2?
I think it was remember. 2.
Year
maybe.
2, maybe. Year 2. So for number 7, I'm going to give you a hint. Your friend. That is sarcasm.
Don't say Donald Trump.
You got it.
Oh.
I was going to say the person who lost the election and is in extreme denial, but
Jesus,
you got it with a little more than 87 million Twitter followers.
Oh,
they're not going away. They adore him to death. So enough said about that. Let's just get on off to another topic.
Move on off of that topic, please.
All right. So we are looking at chapter 151 of the book I wrote called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And it looks at the pros and cons of using a Roth IRA as a way of funding your child's education. So, Anika, you've read the chapter. what popped off at you. Why don't you comment on a few things, and I'll supplement it with a few more. And then I want to answer another question at the end that I probably should have had a chapter for in the book, and that is, if you can't afford to fund a 529 and a Roth IRA, which one should you do? But I'll answer that at the end. Bonus content.
Okay, I'm assuming you can't do both, but we'll get there.
Well, you can do both if you have the money for it, but some people say, look, okay, I don't have the money to do both. So I can't, there's just not enough money at the end of the month there. So I got to do one. Which one?
Okay.
So that's what we'll take on.
Yeah, and I did notice that you were comparing the Roth to the 5, just basically making the comparison between the benefits between the two. But the Roth IRA is a retirement plan that's used, that's funded with after tax dollars. So the traditional IRAs, it's pre-tax dollars. So when you make the withdrawals, you get taxed on it or whatever. But when you make the withdrawals from the Roth IRA, it's tax free. So now then you go into the pros and the cons. So do you want to go ahead and dive into those, or do you want to say
let's hit on a couple, because let's look at this from the practical reality. You've got a 50-year-old out here trying to figure out how they're going to pay for college, and they don't feel they make enough money off their salary to pay for it. And maybe the child's got some scholarships, but not enough to cover it. So they're looking at their sources. And so, they're saying, okay, do I tap into my retirement account to pay for it? Or do I, if they have a 529, which one is better? And so that's kind of what we're looking at. This is a common question that I get is, which of these sources should I do? Remember, there's lots of options, right? There's home equity. There's a home equity loan. There's home equity line of credit. There's a Parent Plus loan. There's retirement accounts. So these are decisions that are very common that families are trying to figure out. Like, is it worth it to do it? So here we're just looking at the pros and the cons. So I don't know if we need to go over all these, Anika, but
I don't know. I think it's worth it, because some of them, I think you did a good job of blowing through some points last time. So I think we can blow through these pretty quickly, because
let's blow through them then.
because the first one is that it's pretty relevant, obviously, because most people, are behind on their retirement plans. Yeah. So that's the big con, is that you're already tapping into something that's already, tapping you, or, you're not really there in terms of trying to take away from it. So that's
let me say something else about that. So most financial planners recommend you have at least 14 times the amount of money that you think you're going to need to live off of in a retirement account. So if you think that you need $70,000 a year, just depending on lifestyle and stuff, that's $980,000 that you would need in a retirement account. And most people are not there. Right. It could be different figures I just threw that 70,000. Somebody else maybe could live off 40,000. Someone else might need 120,000. It's just, these are all, lifestyles vary depending on where you live and your lifestyle and all kinds of factors, who you're supporting. But I'm just throwing that out. That's a common rule. And some of it depends on what age you retire. I won't get too much into that. But the bottom line is most people don't have enough in their retirement account. So you start tapping into that retirement account. That's a problem. And especially because you can borrow for college. You can't borrow for retirement.
All right. Okay. All right. So the next one, that there are income caps on this. So not everyone's eligible because of that. So I think it was some data. What was it? 2017, 2018?
Yeah, I have the updated data. So it's a slightly updated. It's a few thousand more. If you make more than $139,000 as a single or $206,000 as a married filing jointly, then you're not eligible. So that's another point. Like even people that might want to use it might not be eligible.
Okay. Now, the next one is that, the con is that you've got to plan ahead. That's not necessarily a con, but, if you haven't planned ahead, then you won't be able to do this, because it's got to be established for at least 5 years, the fund itself.
Right. So if you haven't been using an IRA or saving, if you haven't, this is a new idea for you, then, you're disqualified.
Okay. Well, let me jump down to the caps. So the contribution caps were at one time $5,500 a year if you were under 50, and then $6,500 if you were over 50.
And they've been bumped $500 now. So now they're $6,000 and $7,000.
Okay.
$6,000 a year under 50, $7,000 over 50.
Okay. And I saved this one for last because this is the biggest one, is that I think in that whatever amount that you use, if you take money out of that fund and use towards your kids' tuition or whatever, college, you have to report that it's income on the FAFSA So if your kid is not a senior, where you point out here, it's best to use these if they're a senior, because obviously they don't have a next year after that, then that's going to hurt you in your FAFSA, basically.
Yeah. And, we'll talk about this again a little bit more later, because it's gotten a little bit easier now with the prior year. But this is huge because, so we've talked about this before.
Mm-hmm.
When schools are trying to figure out how much a family can afford to pay for college, doing a need-based analysis, they basically look at the parents' income and assets and the students' income and assets. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
But income far and away drives EFC way, way, way more than assets. If you could have $100,000 of assets, remember, your primary home is protected for most schools.
Mm-hmm.
There are some CSS profile schools that don't protect it, but for most schools, because most schools only ask for the FAFSA, so your primary residence is protected and your retirement account is shielded. So that's where most people have their assets anyway. But even so, let's say they have $100,000 sitting in the bank. The school's gonna ask for around $5,500 from that.
Mm-hmm.
You add up and have an extra $100,000 on your income, and you watch how much they take out of that.
Mm-hmm.
So the formula really hits income hard, much, much, much more so than it hits assets. And the problem is, if you take a distribution from a Roth IRA to pay for college, it is considered additional income. It's considered no different than you made $20,000 more in your salary. The formula treats it the same way as an income distribution. So they're going to expect you to pay way more. So here you are thinking you're putting money, into the account to pay for college, but in reality, it's going to make the amount of need-based aid that you're eligible for be decreased significantly. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Mm-hmm.
So that is a big factor. It's a huge factor.
Yeah. Now, you also, you point out the fact that if it's a senior, you're better off if you're a senior because you don't come back. But what if you go to grad school? Isn't it the same thing? Because you still have to do the FAFSA again for that.
Yeah. So I was thinking, primarily here in the undergraduate context,
mm-hmm.
Because grad school has a whole bunch of different rules on so many different things.
Okay.
That I kind of, left this book to the purview of undergrad here, because there's so many, even of the financial instruments we've talked about don't even apply to grad school.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them do, but a lot of them don't.
Okay.
So in undergraduate context. Yeah. So that's the biggest con by far,
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is it's going to decrease the need-based aid that you're eligible for, because it will be treated as income, and income is where you really get whacked on the formula.
Right.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. The other one is a really big one too. The first one, Anika, the fact that most people don't have enough saved in the retirement, and you can't borrow for, So really, there's two really big ones in here.
Okay.
But there are some pros.
Yep. Going into the pros. And so, and this is where, the comparisons come in with the 529. So if you get a scholarship and, you've been planning, trying to figure out how you're going to take away from this Roth, but if the student gets a scholarship, then you're good. You just use that money for something else, where if it were a 529 plan, you would just simply have to, give somebody else the funds. So it's not like it would be impacted if the child decided, or not even decided if the child got a scholarship, but also if they decided not to go to college. there is no impact there.
Right. So last week, I think it was last week. Was it last week? The weeks are starting to meld together. Me and Nika. Was it last week?
COVID's coming back, so all the time merging is coming back.
We talked about 529s recently, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the advantages we talked about was how flexible they were. Right? I think it was last week. Because we covered 16 of the 18 reasons why 529 is the best of retirement vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talked about was the flexibility of how you can it's easy to transfer beneficiaries. And remember, I gave the example, what if somebody gets a scholarship? What if somebody doesn't go to college? Well, what this is saying is, what if there is no other person, to transfer that 529 over to? So let's say one child decides not to go to college, but you were an only child, And so in that case, the 529 is a lot more limiting than this. Where with the Roth, if somebody doesn't go to college or somebody gets a scholarship, you don't have to worry about transferring the money to another beneficiary. Because what if there is no other beneficiary?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then just going into the last two pros. I mean, we talked about the planning. You have to have this fund established for 5 years. So the pros for the people who plan early, basically, that are hearing this, this right now and have a kid that's maybe in middle school or elementary or even early high school or whatever. That 5-year plan isn't such a bad, planning period isn't such a bad thing because it's only 5 years and you'll have time to establish it and, and prepare for that. And then the final one is that there are no age limitations when you open a Roth plan. So, anybody can do that thing.
Yeah. The biggest pro for the 529 is that, for the Roth. Earlier, I talked about you don't want a distribution because a distribution is treated as income, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the other side, though. Because retirement money is protected, when you're saving in a Roth, it's not counted as income or assets. So it isn't increasing your EFC. Remember, your assets increase your EFC between 5 to 6%, where your income increases it substantially. When it's in a retirement account, it's completely protected. So that money's completely shielded. Now you say, well, but wait a minute. You told me when I turn around and I distribute it, then I'm going to get whacked on income. Yeah, but here's the thing. What if you filled out the FAFSA for the last time, or even the second last time now that it's prior year?
Mm-hmm.
So then you filled it out. And then, so once again, it's not going to be in the asset or income formula because that money's shielded. And then after you got your EFC, you choose to use your Roth IRA. That's not going to show up as a distribution because when they ask about it, they only ask about the 2019 right now for the current senior class or 2020 next year. And if you're in 2021 and you do this, they'll never see this. It'll be completely shielded. It'll be invisible. So that's one advantage of it. It actually could help you from a need-based aid analysis standpoint, but that presumes many things. And the biggest thing that it presumes is that you have enough in retirement so that you can afford to take that loss because of that point we said before. Most people don't have enough. So let's say it's a husband and a wife and they each have $1.5 million in their retirement account. And then one of them also has a pension. Then, you know what I mean? It may not kill you to pull out 50 to 100,000 out of your Roth IRA. It won't show up as an income or assets if you do it after you filed your financial aid paperwork. So there are some, and another thing that sometimes people bring up as a pro is in many instances, when it comes to saving in a Roth IRA, you have a lot more options in terms of where to put your money. Like I know I don't do a Roth IRA, but I use IRAs and I also do SEP IRAs for my business. And I can put stuff in anything for that. Like you can put them in stocks if you want. You have access to every investment vehicle imaginable. So you have a lot more flexible places to put your money. Where at the 529, you're limited to the options that the plan offers you. So there's some pros and there's some cons, but for most people, for the overwhelming majority of people, Anika, using the Roth's not going to be good because they're not where they should be with their retirement savings.
All right. Okay.
And then even if they are where they should be, you need to make sure you're doing it after you filed your last FAFSA or CSS profile that the college will see. Because then And it's not like you're being, shady here. You're not being shady. There's nothing wrong with that. They'll ask for the paperwork for prior year, and it's not when you made the change. It's not when you did it. So it doesn't show up. It's literally invisible. So it's complicated, but it's case by case. But in 95% of the time, it's not going to be, it's not going to be advisable. It's just going to take someone that's really saved a lot and really in a really comfortable position. And it's going to take somebody doing it after they filed their financial aid paperwork for the last time.
Okay. And
Clear? Confusing?
So are you framing this as like a last resort to funding college, or?
Well, not necessarily, because if you're that person that has a really large, Roth IRA, it actually could make sense for you to use this, but most people are not there. And once again, this is only after you filled your financial aid paperwork for the last couple of times so that it won't show up as a distribution of income.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's not necessarily a last resort. In some places, in some places you basically sheltered the money. It doesn't show up as an asset and it doesn't show up as income. So there are people that it's a brilliant way to do it, but these are only going to be people that really have large amounts in retirement. And depending where you live, like 1.5 on the husband and the wife's retirement accounts. If you're living in Manhattan or San Francisco, that still may not be a lot. The cost of living is so different in different places in this country.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's I know it's complicated because there's a lot of nuance here, but I'd rather be right than simple.
Yeah, right. Right.
So now I want to take on the question I said I wanted to answer, Anika. Do you think if someone says, look, you keep telling me, say for 529, you keep telling me people don't put away enough money for the retirement. So which one should I do? I can't do both. There's just not enough money for me to do both. I got a mortgage. I got a car. I got, utilities. I got everything else that you have when you have a family when it comes to expenses, food and everything else. So I don't have money for both. Which one should I do? How do you think I advise?
529.
Nope.
Really?
Not at all. Retirement.
Wait, what?
Retirement, because you can always get scholarships for college and you can borrow for college. You cannot borrow for retirement. You cannot get scholarships for retirement. So you first take care of your retirement, and then only if there's money left over do you look at funding 529.
Oh.
I thought I'd get you on a trick question there.
You did get me. That was a good one. Okay.
Because it seems like it's selfish. No, take care of me, not my kid. That's how it sounds. But it's really not, because, like I said, just scholarships for college, just borrowing for college. I got you. You potentially can use your Roth IRA for college if it grows big enough.
Okay. Makes sense.
That's a little secret that a lot of people don't know. First, should be maxing out your retirement savings, and of course, starting early. And then, that's the way to do it. That's the plan.
Get to working on those scholarships. Gotcha.
Yep. Get to working on those ships. I call them ships.
They are.
Nika, you have a good weekend.
Thanks. You too, Mark.
We'll see you next week for the big 152.
Until the next round.
Okay. It's time for a question from one of our listeners. Okay, friends, that is not Anika's voice you're about to hear. We've got Dave today on the question from the listener because it's a Canadian question, so I thought I'd bring some of his Canadian expertise. Dave, you want to read the question from the listener and then share some of your thoughts, and I'll share some of mine.
Jillion from California asked, I heard people get dual citizenship if they attend college in Canada. Can that be true? So, Mark, there's a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is it's not quite true. But the longer answer is, but it can help you in the process of getting a citizenship from Canada once you graduate. So I got a lot of this information from the Canadian immigration website and also from Canada.ca. And it's about a 2-minute blurb. Do you want me to give it? Mark?
Go ahead. Go ahead and share it. Go ahead and share it.
Okay.
And then I've got a bunch of things I'm sure I'm going to add that you're not going to share. So go ahead.
Okay. So very quickly, Canada loves immigrants. Immigrants make up over 21% of Canada's population. That's the second highest in the world after Australia's 30%, Germany's 18%, and the U.S. is 15%. And in fact, 340,000 new immigrants came to Canada in 2019. That compares with the U.S., which has a population nearly 9 times larger, of only accepting 577,000. That being said, the process is actually quite complex and changes. So briefly, how does Canada admit its immigrants? There are 4 categories. 58% is through economic criteria, 27% is through family sponsorship, 14% is through the refugee program, and 1% is from a humanitarian other. So as a student, you would be concerned about the economic pathway. And in the economic pathway, there are 2 main ways you can do it. Number 1 is under the Federal Highly Skilled Workers Program, and that's via a point system where they give preference to younger candidates with job offers and high levels of education experience and language proficiency. So obviously, if you're studying in Canada, for whatever reason, you're going to hit a lot of these points. You're going to be young, you're going to be educated, and you'll probably be landing a great job in Canada if you decide to stay. And then there's another way, which is the Provincial Nominee Program, which is similar to the federal program, but you apply through the province and you apply to specific jobs and needs of that province. So if you're in Quebec, it might be for specific language speakers, or if you're in Alberta, it might have to do with the natural gas or the mining industry. You still have to be approved by the federal government, but it's specifically tailoring the needs to a region of Canada, not to Canada as a whole. And that's an idea that the United States should look at when they look at depopulated areas of the country and immigration to help them economically. So what does this mean for a student? Well, there are 5 criteria of who can apply to be a citizen. Number 1, you have to have lived in Canada 3 out of 5 years. You must be a permanent resident. You must have filed taxes. You must pass a citizenship test. And you must have language skills. So as of October 11th, 2017, permanent residents in Canada who were previously on a student permit will be able to count a portion of their time studying in the country towards their Canadian citizenship requirement. So this means that international students and graduates who wish to settle in Canada can now have an easier way to obtain Canadian citizenship. But it's not one for one. What they've said is that each day that you spent as a student counts as a half a day of your permanent residency time period up to a period of 365 days. But you still have to meet all the other criteria in order to be accepted under their point system. And once you meet that criteria, you have to do language testing, biometric screening, and the process takes about 6 months. So that's the long answer, Mark. I hope it
that's good. That's good. And you covered a big chunk of what I wanted to share. You briefly brought up the part that the new policy change that will allow half credit for your time as a student in a Canadian school, counting toward the requirement of living in the country. Now, here's a quote by Canada's Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, Marco Medicino, that sort of reinforces what Dave says about sort of how welcoming Canada is to immigrants. It says, Canada is a safe and welcoming destination for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. And then it says, immigrants enrich Canada beyond measure, and no accounting of our progress over the last century and a half is complete without excluding the contribution of newcomers. And that comes from the 2020 annual report to Parliament on immigration. Now, most recently, Canada has made a decision to increase its number of permanent residents. It wants to bring in 1.2 million new permanent residents over the next 3 years. And this is an article that came out very recently on studyinternational.com. So it's a November 9th article, 2020, so hot off the press. And basically, it says a number of very interesting things in the article. It says they want to bring 401,000 in 2021, 411,000 in 2022, and then 21,000 in 2023. And it talks about how international students are going to be prioritized in getting these opportunities through a government pathway program. this is a quote by Wendy Theron that says, according to U.S. Canada Director of Research and External Relations, Wendy Theron, international students will be prioritized. So it starts with the work permit. Now, one of the things that Canada does allow is you to get this postgraduate work permit after you complete your studies. And so the work permit can be for up to 3 years. It's very open and flexible. And this time when you're getting those work permit can count toward your time spent in the country. So that's something that's, very, very significant. Now, they are going to be prioritizing certain skills. So it makes it very clear, like we're looking for federally highly skilled workers, business workers, economic pilots, caregivers, agri-food pilots. It goes on and lists a number of specific areas where they're targeting where you will be prioritized. And interestingly, Canada is the world's third leading destination for international students with 642,000 foreign students. Now, where are these students coming from? So the number one place is India. India has been the leading international student source for Canada. The second leading source has been China. The third leading source has been South Korea. The fourth leading source has been France. And the fifth leading source has been Vietnam. But, and here's a quote, the country is seeing an increased number of applicants from the U.S. I think we are going to see more and more applicants for study permits from the U.S. because it's very easy to get your foot in the door and to get permanent residency if you're coming from the U.S. And Dave, you and I did we did an article on that, which actually was what inspired this question. Yeah, because Jillion, she started her question by saying, great episode on Canadian colleges back in October. And then she asked her question. So she's referring to that conversation that we had, then, which I think is what prompted her to ask this question. And so one of the things you also hit on, Dave, I was going to go over the key things for citizenship, but you hit them. Being a permanent resident, having lived in Canada for 3 of the last 5 years, the citizenship, the language test, and having filled your taxes out. So I agree with you in the way you described it. It's not an automatic, but it really can make the process a lot easier because, one, you come to Canadian school, then it's not that difficult to get your post-work opportunity, which can be good for up to 3 years. And then when you're doing that, some of the time as a student, as well as the time when you're doing your work experience, they count toward the time spent in the country. And then if you combine that with a skill that's in demand, it's not a guarantee, but it is a good pathway. It is a good pathway.
The last thing is 40 to 45% of all immigrants to Canada are ending up in Toronto, an amazing city. The other main cities are,
if you can afford
Montreal.
It's like San Francisco, man. That place is cold and expensive. It's my favorite place in Canada, but it's cold and expensive. Two things I don't like.
Well, yes, that's true. Choose your point. Is it colder or is it more expensive? It's both.
I mean, and since this is scary to say this because Dave and I have been gone since 1982 now. Yeah. It's crazy, 38 years since we left. Yeah, but it's gotten outrageously expensive since we left. All of Canada has, even all the ways down an hour. I mean, people are living an hour and a half away and commuting to Toronto to work, and it's driven the cost of housing up in like places like Brantford and Simcoe.
But you know why? It's supply and demand. As some may know, 2 years ago, Toronto passed Chicago in size and is now the fourth largest city in North America. No, behind New York and LA. It's Toronto. And Toronto is gaining over 100,000 people per year. It is officially the fastest growing city in North America. And if current population trends hold, it will actually surpass Los Angeles in the next 2 decades. So part of what's happening is...
You mean third biggest, the third highest. You said fourth.
I'm sorry, third. You're third. Yeah, so it's past Chicago and it's on track to pass LA. And so one of the things that's happened is that you're absolutely correct, Mark. I mean, there are no buildable lots in Toronto. You go for miles and miles and miles, and the traffic on the main highways there extends for 2-hour commutes. When we were there, you could have zipped into town in 20, 30 minutes. So So it's a sign of how desirable Canada is, despite the fact that, yes, folks, it is somewhat cold.
Well, hopefully, Jillian, we gave you some answers there. And I noticed in my own counseling caseload, lots more students are asking about Canada. Yeah. And, you know, it's a good bang for your buck, too, with the exchange on the dollar and the quality of the school. But there's some differences, and people should be aware of them. So hopefully, Jillian, you got your answers. Thanks, Dave, for a special appearance on Question from the Listener. First time ever.
Sounds good. Thank you, Mark. My privilege.
Okay, friends, Chika Nwosu, she is back. And in part 1, she discusses ways in which college was just different than she expected it to be. And then she talks about what she's found to be the hardest part of being a college student. And then she goes in depth on a program she's in called PRISM. She tells us what she likes about PRISM and what she doesn't like about PRISM. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, Chika, it is great to have you back. You know, it's been about a year and a half since we had you here on part 2. You did a part 1 and a part 2. Yeah. But for those who haven't heard any of the previous episodes, why don't you just give a little bit of a background information, where you went to high school, where you're at now, and anything else you want to say.
Okay. Hi, my name is Chika Nwosu. I went to high school at Mill Creek High School in Gwinnett County in Georgia, and now I am a sophomore at the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. And I'm majoring in biology and psychology, hoping to get a minor in dance as well.
There we go. And we strongly encourage you to go back and listen to part 1 and part 2, because some of the best feedback we've had from our listeners has come from Chika part 1 and part 2. But the history is that we had a question from a listener who said, you know, I'd love for you to track a student long term. Could you do a 3-part interview? First of all, when they start their college process. So that was part 1. And then at the end, and so there, Chika went through all of the schools where she got in, where she didn't get in, what her visits were like, what her experience was like, how she made her decision. And so that was part 2, which would have been, I guess, a year and a half ago, right? Because it was just before you started your freshman year.
Yeah.
And so now you're at the University of Miami. So why don't we just start by just throwing it open-ended? Like, what was it like when you first got on campus? You know, like tell us about your experience when anything you want to share.
Well, when I first got to campus, it's a very, very beautiful campus. And I've come to realize how privileged I am going to the school that I go to, because they were very, very welcoming to freshmen and new first years. And there was like a whole orientation, because most students, they go to like a 2-day, 3-day orientation over the summer to register for classes, and then they go back home. And my school, we did the first week before classes start, all freshmen have to come and like move in and go to different events and like have like their own little orientation fellow that takes them around campus and stuff like that. And that was very, very helpful for me when I first came to campus, because I didn't know anybody, and everybody's, a freshman and shy and they don't know what to do. So there's just a lot of events that brought all the freshmen together, and like the people I met orientation week are like my best friends, and I still live with them like sophomore year and everything like that. So it was a very nice process moving in.
You know, I can't emphasize how important those orientation weeks are. The same for particularly my oldest daughter, Karis. Like, her best friends right now were the ones that she met during orientation week. And I was talking to another student of mine yesterday, and she said the same thing. Like, her best friends are the ones that she met during orientation week. She's currently a sophomore at Georgia Tech right now. And so at orientation week, like, most schools will require it anyway, but just go in like wide open with an open mind, because a lot of good things happen there, you know? So let's talk a little bit about what your expectations were for college, and how now that you really kind of know what it's like and it's not theory, it's like the real deal. How would you say college has been different than what you thought it would be like? And I'm going to ask you to comment on at least one positive thing and maybe one negative thing. Like maybe one area where you had a honeymoon and you realize, oh, it's not perfect like my vision. And then maybe one area where maybe it's even exceeded expectations, or anything else you want to share.
Well, I honestly, before coming to college is a very big gray space. Like I was doing high school and I had no idea what college would even be like. There's so many misconceptions and things. Like you see college on TV, then you hear calls from your older friends, and you just hear a lot of different things from a lot of different people, because everybody's college journey is very different. And I'd have to say that for me, in terms of the friendships and just experiences that you can have, was not something that I expected. The friends I made and the connections I made and just the people in my classes, and having people who are just very goal driven and on the same path as me, I couldn't have imagined having that. Like that was probably like the highlight, is the friendships and just connections that I've made. And especially just being in Miami, it's just a lot of experiences. So that's just something that was blown out of the water, expectations for me. I will say that it's just kind of like, honeymoon over. It's just the amount of work that you have to do, for sure. And especially, I think there's a big difference from freshman year to sophomore year, at least for me, because freshman year is great, but I think a big misconception is when you get to freshman, you meet a bunch of professors that don't care about you, and it's just your 1 in 200 classroom lecture halls and everything like that. And I feel like a lot of my freshman professors really cared about me, and they really wanted to help everybody, and they're just like, come to office hours, like, I'm here to help you, and which is great. And I feel like there's a lot more class learning. And I feel like sophomore year, it was very different, especially just because of Corona, but it was just a lot of, you need to study on your own. And like, there's a lot of self-learning that I feel like it's just like, oh, we're in college now. Like we're here. We've hit the ground. Yes.
So it sounds like you're almost making it sound like your epiphany happened more in sophomore year than freshman year, as far as the level of independence and the level of workload.
Yes. And I think it depends truly on your major, but I think definitely the shift happened for me just because of the way Miami is set up. They do a 3-semester chem instead of a 4-semester. So a lot of pre-meds at other colleges will take organic chemistry their sophomore year. And I took mine starting freshman year. And then I, like with the program that I'm in, I was also taking like physics. So for me, the course load was very boom, smack, a lot sophomore year. I was like, oh wow. Like this is it. Like this is the college. But just depending on, some people decide to take like a lighter course load. They spread out their pre-med recs. They, like if you're in the business school or school of comms, like the pacing's a little bit different. So I would say for some people, it's academically wise, it's still probably the same as the freshman year. But I'd say for me, my epiphany was this semester when I started,
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, as we've said on many occasions, interest in studying in Canada has never been higher than it is now. So our recommended resource for episode 151 is the website Canada.ca, which is just the official website for the country of Canada. But they have some excellent sections on here regarding studying in Canada. For example, there's a section called Study, Work, and Stay in Canada. One of the things that I do love about this website is they have the most recent updated articles. There's a lot of articles right now, if you were to go there, that have come out since November 15th. There's a nice section on applying for a study permit, getting a study permit, studying in Canada as a minor child, learning about student life in Canada, applying to schools in Canada as an international student, scholarships for international students. Those are just some of the sections. So check out Canada.ca if you have any interest in studying in Canada. Now return to my interview with Chika. So talk to me a little bit about PRISM, because I know you're in PRISM. Chika, what is PRISM? I know a small group of people are in PRISM.
So Prism is kind of like a little STEM cohort, mainly for pre-meds. I don't think there's no such thing as pre-med majors, so I don't think like pre-med majors is a requirement, but I think being pre-med is the general consensus for anybody in there. And so the idea is just that we are a small group of people, so we can build an easier like connection with each other and also with our professors. So instead of being in a 200 lecture hall class for Gen Chem or Bio, our classes, I think the biggest was 40. Then a lot of us, good amount of us dropped out. So, the classes are smaller from year to year. But I would say in previous years, the classes went down from like 100 to 12. So
Wow.
we went down from like 40 to like maybe like 24 or something like that.
Now,
so,
are these all people that said pre-med is not for me, I'm out?
Some people my friend Dante, he was a math major. So he's just like, I'm not pre-med, so why am I in here? I'm dipping. My other friend Brandon, he's like, yeah, pre-med's just not for me. He's in the business school. This other friend named Rohit, he didn't even fail out. He's generally just really smart. And he's just like, yeah, nah, I'm just going to go chase a bag and go to business. So he went to business. So like different people, some people fail out. Some people like realize pre-med's not for me. It has its positive and its benefits. Like it's weird because you don't always know who's like the freshmen that are in Prism because it's not like nationally like across campus like shouted in your face.
It's not a big prism on your chest everywhere, wherever you go.
Yeah, so it's not like I can run into freshmen and like give them advice, but I would definitely say like if they were like incoming freshmen going to Miami that like Prism was being like they were invited to Prism, I'd say you'd have to know what kind of student you are because some people are just very naturally gifted at certain subjects, so it's like it's much easier for them. Whereas for other people, if it takes you a little bit longer to learn things, Prism isn't always the best just because it's just a lot of your pre-med smushed into the first 2 years. So it's like I'm really grateful for the friends that I've made and like because we're in Prism, like they really don't want to fail anybody. So like there are curves at the end of the day when you're making it so hard. Like yes, you did a curve, but like I could have done better by myself without the curve in an easier class. So it is definitely something that I would tell people. It's just like you have to know what kind of student you are. I'm realizing that I don't thrive the best with a lot of things thrown at me at once because a lot of like looking back at my Prism class, it's just like I do really great in one and fall short in another. So I do great in one, the next year fall short in another. So it's just like, okay, well then if I had just spread these out, I would have just done really great. Oh, these spread out. So it's just definitely something you have to realize what kind of student you are and go from there.
I mean, I know you have to take some classes that Prism students have to take as part of the requirement to be in Prism that another student could still end up applying to med school without taking that. Can you comment on a couple like the classes? Like if you're Prism, everybody has to take, and I know these are like hard classes too, but can you comment on that?
There are two main ones. Because sometimes, like looking back at it, like Prism does get kind of like the better teachers. Like a lot of kids may not be in Prism, so like, can I take it with this professor? Because we do, on average, get the like professors that maybe have like a higher rate my professor and all these kind of things. But like some classes that I don't feel are necessary, like the comp sci class you have to take. It's not even a real comp sci. We do like Python for a month. And then we move on to this weird math program that doesn't make any sense. And it's just really, really time consuming. And I was blessed because I took it during Corona. So we had like no exams. It was just all homework grades. But like if I had if it was not Corona and like I had exams and stuff, I probably would have just dropped it because they would have me taking this comp sci class, which is very time consuming, plus university physics, which is like calc based, very, very hard. And then organic chemistry too, which is also just very, very hard. And it's a beast in its own. So comp sci is a class I was just like, I don't know why we're taking this each and every day.
But the calc-based physics, that was that the other one? We said there's two main
That's
ones? Is
the
that
other one. A lot of pre-meds, everybody dreads physics, and we have to take it because it's a pre-med rec, but a lot of people will opt into algebra physics. I think that's 99.5% of the pre-meds that take college physics. It's the 0.5 pre-meds or the BMEs, like the biomedical engineering pre-meds will take university physics because they're like engineering majors. But if you're not an engineering major, everybody that has to take physics takes algebra-based physics. And physics makes Prism makes us take university physics, which is I don't want to say necessarily hard, but it's just really, it's much, much harder than college physics. And they say that it may help you on the MCAT because like the physics equation, like university physics doesn't emphasize memorizing formulas. It kind of emphasizes deriving different equations and stuff like that and learning it holistically, which will like theoretically help you on the MCAT. That being said, I know plenty of people who did fine on their MCAT for physics section. And
you're like, they didn't need to torture me just to get a higher MCAT score, and I could have got it anyway.
Like I'm just gonna say, and just what they're saying to me, and then just seeing other people who didn't take it, they're doing just as fine. I'm not really seeing the point. So yeah,
there's a saying: "What doesn't kill you only makes you stronger." So hopefully, when you're
stronger,
hopefully when you see all these med school acceptances rolling in, you'll be like, you know what, Prism, you know what, you had my back.
I'm hoping. Definitely.
Next week in the news, applications tank in state that requires SAT or ACT. Florida sees major decline in applications. An article from Scott Jasek of Inside Higher Education. Mark and Anika will discuss, do schools give the same financial aid awards to transfer students that they give to freshman applicants? Our question from a listener is, there's a question in the CSF profile, and how much money can I afford to pay? Do I have to answer that question? Our interview is part 2 with Chika Nwosu on reflections of my freshman and sophomore year at University of Miami. And our spotlight comes to you from the University of South Florida.
But friends, this is a special segment on early decision. As I spoke to admissions officer after admissions officer in the fall, they were freaking out, flying blind. I used that example once with one eye covered. There's no model for this. Another one said, we have no idea what to expect, but we know people can't visit us and we can't visit them. So I have no idea how many early decision applicants that we're going to get. And at the early stage, they were coming in really slow. So, schools compare, where are they at with their number of early decision applicants on October 1st compared to last year, or September 15th. And the numbers looked pitiful. But toward the end, they just surged and they just picked up and exceeded previous numbers in most instances. I'll just give you a couple examples. And these numbers are still coming out. Lots and lots. In fact, probably 90% of schools have not released their numbers yet. I mean, when Dave and I are recording this is December 12th. So for a lot of people, they haven't even released decisions yet. Most early decision schools haven't released decisions. But here are some for you just to prove the point. John Hopkins is up 11%. Duke is up 18%. Emory's up 8%. And Sam Prouty from Middlebury has said they're up. Tulane is way up. BC is up 10%. And Cornell's expected to be up over 30%. And University of Virginia was up 38%. That's official. Wow. That's been out. Articles on it. A stunning amount. And then also for some early action schools, they're up. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is up 10%. And Georgia Tech is up 20%. So, Dave, any idea? What's your theory? Any idea why they'd be up?
I think that people are just so nervous they're trying to lock in security because we're in an insecure time and world.
I definitely think that's part of it. I think there's absolutely part of it, no question about it. You couldn't have said it any better. There's no question in my mind that's a big part of it. And there's two other reasons that I'm convinced are playing a huge role in this. The first one is the fact that schools have gone test optional.
Yes.
Now, in one sense, we shouldn't be surprised by this, Dave. Do you remember me discussing with you how Stanford medical apps were up 50% when they made the MCAT optional?
That's right.
So this is the transfer of that over to the college process. And one of the reasons why I know this is true is because if you look at the NESCAC schools, the ones that were test optional before are not seeing this surge like the Bowdens and the Bateses, compared to the ones that just went test optional for this year. So you can clearly see that the test optional decision has played a major role in schools and people applying. And, it's funny. I remember sharing a conversation I had with somebody in Yale, and I didn't share all of that conversation. So I'll share a little bit more now. So I was talking with the senior admission officer at Yale, and I was asking them if they would consider dropping SCEA. Now, SCEA is an acronym for single choice early action. Yale's only one of 4 schools along with Harvard, Stanford, and Princeton that has this policy, which basically means you can apply early action, but you can only apply to one school early action. And I hate it as an admission counselor because what happens is people apply there and then they don't get in. And then they also lost their ability to signal to all the other early action schools that they have interest in them. So they don't get in that school. And then they're hurt with certain schools because they can't apply early action elsewhere. So I was challenging them, particularly because Princeton made the decision this year to not offer that. Because of the pandemic, they dropped their SCEA and just said, we're not having early action at all. We're only having regular admission. So I was asking Yale, will you consider following Princeton and dropping it? And they said, absolutely no way. Now, one of the reasons why they told me no way, and I shared this before, but before I put a focus on the fact that they said we have a 90% yield with our SCEA, and we think it's important that people tip and show us their interest, and it helps us with their planning, knowing that we're going to get 90% of those kids if we admit them. But the other thing that they said in that conversation, and I didn't share this, is that research shows that when a school goes test optional, they get 8% more applications. So he said, if we're going to get 8% more applications and we don't have any idea, which ones like us the most, which is supposedly what, they think if you're going to do single choice EA, then our chances of getting the enrollment number right are very, 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 very slim. We're likely to over-enroll or under-enroll. So we need some guidelines to do enrollment management. But I didn't focus that much on that. The 8% increase that schools get historically when they go test optional. Now, some of the numbers that are coming out from some schools are also revealing what percentage of school students applied test optional in the early pools. And you can see some cases, pretty sizable number are applying test optional. I'm not going to say this because I didn't get permission from the school to share this, but in one of those schools that I mentioned a whole bunch of schools where they've had a surge. 61% of the applicants are applying with test scores and 39% without. That's a high number without. When you look at schools like Chicago, they're normally like 10, 12, 14% apply without scores. So clearly what's happening is a lot of people are saying, if test scores are not required, then I have a chance. And this is consistent with how I find students think. So one of the reasons why the most selective schools tend to get they don't get that many applications where students are completely outside of their academic profile is because students look at their average test scores. And if they don't see that they have them, they think, no, I'm not going to waste my application.
Yeah.
So the opposite of that is also true. So you have a lot of students saying, oh, man, I don't have to worry anymore about having that 1530 average that they have. And of course, they interpret the score as a cutoff, but that's another story. So then they say, I'm going to take a shot at it. And what we don't know yet, and there'll be some studies that'll be done when we look back, is how many of this surge in applicants are really strong versus people that really didn't have any business applying to that school, but they didn't have good counseling, or they did and they were stubborn, but they figured without the test score, I'm just going to give it a shot. So there's no question in my mind that's a huge reason. Dave, any comments on that? And then I'll tell you another reason that I'm convinced is playing a role, in addition to the one you said in this, because I had 3 reasons, and you mentioned one of them already. In this age of uncertainty, people just want certainty. And now I've mentioned the one reason. Any thoughts on that? And then I'll mention another one.
Well, boy, I really think how difficult it must be to be an admissions officer, because let's think about it, Mark. It's like your workload increased 40%. They didn't add additional staff to take care of this ED surge. So that's that many more applications you had to read. And now you also don't have baseline criteria. You're getting applications from regions and schools that you're probably not familiar with. You don't have a baseline of SAT and ACT scores to assess whether the grades that they're reporting are competitive with some of the other schools that you're more familiar with. And you have to be concerned with that all-important yield. I mean, your job depends upon you making the right choice and not picking 10 extra people who don't end up applying, tanking your yield. So I am not envious of being an admission officer and having to sort through this type of dilemma and job. I mean, these people probably didn't sleep.
Well, it's definitely true that the workload increased, but I can tell you they're ecstatic about it because they were very, very worried about the opposite problem, which was if you have much lower numbers, then you either have to dip and take a caliber student that you're not really comfortable taking because you need to lock certain people in, or you're going to have to go into the regular round where you might have to take 5 applicants to get 1 or 4 to get 1 or 3 to get 1.
Right.
And that's so much more work. Plus, the workload in general tends to be more harder in the regular round because you get so many more regular admission applicants. So they actually like to spread it out more and to have more applications coming in September and October. It's harder for schools that get fewer ED apps and just get a glut of apps that come in January. So they're actually, like doing cartwheels over there about this. But that doesn't mean it's not challenging, but especially for people that, they're brand new to test optional. So they're really trying to find at the seat of the pants to figure out how to apply it in a new year. But the reality is you have a lot of information in your file. You really do. And most of them, I'm already hearing from them saying like, we're already getting way more comfortable with this than we thought we would be. And I'm more convinced than ever, Dave, that they'll be test optional again next year. I mean, The fact that they're getting all these applications is all the proof that they need that this is a really good thing. So I stand by that prediction, like, etched in stone. So let me tell you the other reason why I think the apps are way up. One of the most common questions I get, and one of the most common questions, and we've answered it on the podcast, and I've heard admissions officers same thing say, that I keep getting this question over and over and over and over again. In fact, one of them said the 2 most frequently asked questions that I'm getting asked this year are you really test optional, or are you just saying that? And second question is, did so many kids take gap years last year that there are going to be fewer spots for my class? And that, I believe, is the other reason. That perception is so widespread out there, partly due to some articles that have been run on a few schools that are way outside the norm. And partly it just kind of makes common sense. Like, okay, you keep hearing about the gap year. Well, if that gap year pushed off to next year and then they're taking a spot, are they taking my spot, making it more competitive? Now, we've talked ad nauseum why that's not true and how schools will expand their class because of loss of revenue and take more kids. But that's not something that's commonly known. Not that many people listen regularly to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, and they know that. So the perception out there is it's going to be more competitive for me because of all the kids that took gap years last year. So I'm going to have to apply ED to have a chance. Does that make sense, Dave?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, so I just wanted to share that. Like, the preliminary data is coming in, and it is indicating that some of the numbers are up, and they're up like, just to staggering levels. So I'm glad I didn't share this before, because I would have added more stress to the college process for people. Yeah. And certainly if you didn't get in, take some solace in the fact that you probably applied from an ED standpoint in what's turning out to be a very competitive year. Now, the biggest question is, and this is going to vary from school to school, Dave, what are schools going to do with all these applications? That's a question every school faces, and it's going to vary from school to school. Some of them are going to say, you know what? We typically take 40 to 50% of our class ED. We want to keep those same statistics because we know that there's incredible talent that's coming in the regular round, and we don't want to put them at a disadvantage. Other schools are going to say, you know what? A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with COVID-19 and what things are going to look like. So if we've got someone and they look like a good kid and they can do the program and we can lock them in, then we don't have to accept 5 kids to get 1 or 4 to get 1 or 6 to get 1 or whatever their yield rates are in regular admission. And so that's one thing I'm going to be very, very interested in looking at, and I'll do a deeper dive on this stuff when everything's all said and done, is what percentage of the class these schools filled with ED compared to last year. Did they fill more of their class ED, or did they keep it similar? Some of the stats I've seen that have come out so far look similar, but they're also from schools like, for example, University of Virginia. We had Greg Roberts on this podcast. He was very, very, very adamant about the fact that they are not going to take a really large proportion of their class ED because they know that ED in general, it favors one of two people that money is a non-issue for them, so they don't need to compare financial aid offers. Or it can be the other end of the spectrum, but only it can be really gifted and talented, under-resourced kids that have really good counseling, where somebody lets them know, look, your best shot is in the early round. And if you apply to the right schools, they're going to have really generous money. So from a financial standpoint, it appeals to both sides of the barbell. But the vast majority of people in the middle feel like, I just don't feel comfortable committing without comparing what a school offers me or seeing if a school is going to offer me $30,000 or $40,000.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. So that's it. And we'll, I'd like to come back later and do a follow-up, Dave, when there's even more information, when I have even more data from more schools, not only on the percentage, whether their numbers went up or down, but did they go up or down for test optional schools? Early indication is that schools that were already test optional are not seeing the surge like the ones that just went test optional this year. I want to see that data. I want to see what percentage of the class they took. So, once all that stuff is in, I'll probably circle back again. And I know we're nerding and geeking out on this stuff, but we attract an audience, I think, that's interested in this kind of thing. So hopefully we didn't put anybody to sleep.
No, take home points. Test optional made a huge difference. People are insecure about the future and locking in, and there might have been let's lock in before the gap year surge kicks in. So I think that's all good points, and we'll see what the data shows going forward and how it reinforces it. And I also think your point about what percentage of the early EDs the schools start taking, are they going to modify their criteria based on the surge? I think that's very fascinating to see how that shakes out as well.
Well, this is also a case where ignorance was bliss, because I'm glad I didn't know this. I'm glad schools didn't know this, because, Dave, when you were talking about, tough job in admissions, I was also thinking tough being a student right now with all this stuff going on, the stress of the process. And it just would have been added stress if students went in with the mindset that, ED might be up 35% at your school this year. Like, that just would have taken the stress just over the top. So I'm glad that this stuff's coming out after applications are already done and submitted and in.
Awesome.
And if you didn't get in, you can just have a little bit more you could take consolation a little bit more, and that you, in reality, you might have applied in the most competitive year ever for ED.
That's right. Take it in stride, move on.
Keep it going, because there's always a great school out there for you.
Absolutely.
But remember, if you're deferred, we talked about this recently, you've got a difficult challenge, because if you're still interested in the school, you want to maintain some interest in the school, but you cannot afford to let your heart go there. You've got to get just as excited about your other options.
And just last point, Mark, what are the episodes that you did with Rick Singer? You said it was 40.
Rick Singer, Freudian slip, man.
Oh, no, Rick Singer. Oh, I'm sorry. Rick, I'm sorry.
Rick Clark.
Sorry, Rick Clark. Man, I didn't want.
Rick, you went back to Varsity Blues.
Sorry, Mr. Clark. I don't want to.
I think he might be in jail right now, Mr. Rick Singer.
If not, he's prepping for Lompoc. I know that. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Rick Clark.
No. He did a great 3-parter on what's the right way to handle acceptance. Because there's as Rick said in that episode, he said, you can be accepted and be a jerk about it. Yeah. So he talked about what's the right way to handle it if you're accepted, what's the right way to handle it if you're denied, and what's the right way to handle it. We did both deferred and waitlisted. And so check it out. It's a good 3-part series. I think you'll enjoy it. There's some good wisdom that applies to pretty much every student, because those are the options. You can either be waitlisted or deferred, admitted or denied. That's really it.
That's right.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.